The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Sarah Thompson sat alone at 11 at night, staring at the thing on her right cheek that had stopped being just a pimple weeks ago. It had swollen to the size of a walnut now, purple-black and pulsing with each heartbeat. When she touched it, she swore she could feel something moving underneath, something of and writhing beneath her skin. In 12 hours, they would cut her open. On the bedside table lay 3 handwritten letters, one for her mother Margaret, one for her husband David, one for her sister Emily, just in case. Dr. William Patterson's words echoed in her mind. If we'd waited 48 more hours, you might not be here. But Sarah didn't know yet that death wasn't the most terrifying thing waiting for her. The truth buried in her skin for 10 years was, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Along with the city you're watching from now, let's continue with the story. 5 weeks earlier, Sarah Thompson had woken up believing her life was exactly where it should be. At 28, she taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary in Portland, Oregon, where the rain fell soft and constant, and the children still believed in magic. She had been married to David Richardson for 3 years, lived 20 minutes from her mother Margaret, and had finally stopped setting aside money each month for her father's medical bills. Robert Thompson had been gone 15 years now, but the ghost of hospital debt had lingered long after his funeral. That Monday morning, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth while mentally rehearsing the day's lesson on fractions. The small red bump on her right cheek caught her attention. She leaned closer, squinting. It looked like a pimple, maybe a small cyst, nothing remarkable, nothing worth worrying about. She pressed it gently with her finger. It hurt, but only a little. Sarah picked up her phone and texted her younger sister, Emily, who worked as an emergency room nurse and had become the family's unofficial medical consultant for everything from headaches to Hannah's mysterious rashes next door. Small bump on my cheek, pimple, or something else? Emily's response came within minutes. Probably stress. You've been working 12-hour days. Put some benzoyl peroxide on it. It'll go away. Sarah felt relieved. Emily would know. Emily always knew. That evening, she drove to her mother's house for their Monday dinner tradition, a ritual that had begun the year her father died and never stopped. Margaret Thompson lived in the same modest craftsman bungalow where Sarah and Emily had grown up, where their father had taught them to ride bikes in the driveway, and where he had sat them down one terrible afternoon to explain that sometimes good people get sick and don't get better. Margaret was 67 now, a widow who survived on a pension and Social Security. Her hair more silver than brown, her hands always busy with cooking or mending or worrying. The house still smelled like her father's memory, like the chicken soup Margaret made every Monday because Robert had loved it, had asked for it even when the chemotherapy stole his appetite for everything else. David arrived just after Sarah, carrying a bottle of wine and his usual quiet smile. They sat around the table, the 4 of them if you counted the empty chair where Margaret still placed a small framed photograph of Robert and a single candle. It was their way of keeping him present, of pretending death was just another room he had stepped into, somewhere close enough to still feel near. Margaret served the soup, and for a moment everything felt safe. Everything felt whole. Then Margaret's eyes landed to his cheek, and her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Honey, is that bothering you?" Sarah touched her cheek self-consciously. "It's just a pimple, Mom," Emily said. "It's Probably stress. Margaret set down her spoon, her gaze unwavering. It looks red, inflamed. It's fine, Sarah said, forcing lightness into her voice. I've been using cream on it. But Margaret's expression didn't change, and Sarah recognized that look. It was the same look her mother had worn the day she insisted Robert go back to the doctor about the mole on his back, the one he'd dismissed as nothing, the one that had eventually killed him by the second week. The bump had grown, not dramatically, but enough that Sarah noticed it every time she looked in the mirror. It was tender now, a dull ache that sharpened when she accidentally brushed against it. She Googled "red bump on cheek won't go away" and fell down a rabbit hole of medical websites. Cystic acne, allergic reaction, infected hair follicle. Nothing that seemed worth a doctor's visit, especially not without insurance. That detail she kept to herself. The school district had cut 3 teaching positions the previous month, and while Sarah had kept her job, they'd converted her to part-time status to save money. No more benefits, no more health insurance. The COBRA coverage they offered would have cost nearly as much as her rent. She bought over-the-counter acne medication at the pharmacy and applied it twice daily. She took ibuprofen when the pain bothered her. She covered it with makeup before going to work, though her students still noticed. "Miss Thompson, what happened to your face?" a boy named Marcus asked during reading time. "Just a little boo-boo," she said, smiling. Nothing to worry about. But Margaret was worrying. She called every evening, always with the same question, "Have you seen a doctor yet?" "Mom, I'm fine. It's getting better." It wasn't. "Sarah, Elizabeth Thompson, your father said the same thing." The invocation of her full name. The reference to her father, these were Margaret's heavy weapons, and she deployed them without mercy. By the 3rd week, Sarah couldn't hide it anymore. The bump had doubled in size, angry and red, impossible to conceal even with the thickest foundation. She felt feverish at night, waking in damp sheets with a low-grade temperature that hovered just below what she considered real sickness. David noticed, "Babe, you need to get that checked out." "I know," she said. "I will. When?" "Soon." "How much would it cost?" She didn't answer, and he didn't push, because they both understood what she wasn't saying. David had lost his engineering job 3 months ago, though she wasn't supposed to know that. She'd found out by accident when his unemployment paperwork arrived in the mail while he was in the shower. He left every morning at 8 and returned at 6, maintaining the fiction of employment while spending his days at the public library, filling out applications and teaching himself to code through free online courses. They were 2 people drowning in separate oceans, each trying not to let the other see them sink. Margaret appeared at Sarah's door on a Wednesday evening, unannounced, carrying a container of soup and a first aid kit. "Let me see it." Sarah pulled back her hair. The swelling had spread beyond the original bump, a purple shadow blooming across her cheek like a bruise. Margaret's face went pale. "You're going to the doctor tomorrow." "Mom, I already called." "I got you an appointment with Dr. Patterson. I can't afford. I have $500 saved. It's yours." By the 4th week, Sarah could no longer pretend. The swelling had transformed her face, distorting her cheek into something grotesque and unfamiliar. The skin stretched tight and shiny, muscled purple-black like a week-old bruise. Makeup was useless. Her students stared. Parents whispered in the hallway. After pickup on Tuesday morning, Principal Linda Bennett called her into the office. The woman's face was kind but firm. "Sarah, I think you need to take some time off. Focus on your health. I can still teach. This isn't about your ability. It's about whatever's happening to you." Linda gestured toward Sarah's face. "Please, go see a doctor." That evening, David found Sarah sitting in the dark kitchen, a bag of frozen peas pressed against her cheek. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his hands folded on the table. "I know you know," he said quietly. Sarah looked up. "Know what?" "That I lost my job 3 months ago." The admission hung between them like smoke. Sarah removed the frozen peas, setting them aside. Her cheek throbbed immediately. "I found the unemployment letter," she said, "in July." David's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you?" He had no answer for that. They sat in silence. Two people who loved each other, watching their lives crumble in opposite corners of the same room. "How much do we have left?" Sarah finally asked. David pulled out his wallet and emptied it onto the table. 3 bills and some change. $23.47. Sarah wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She was too tired, too scared, too angry at the universe that had taken her father and now seemed intent on taking everything else. "We need to get you to a hospital," David said. "Tonight. We can't afford. I don't care." His voice cracked. "I can't lose you. I won't." Before Sarah could respond, the doorbell rang. Emily stood on the porch, still in her scrubs from the hospital. Her face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "I need to talk to you," Emily said, pushing past them into the house. They sat in the living room, and Emily pulled up her left sleeve, revealing a small bandage on her forearm. No, not her arm. She touched her own cheek, mirroring where Sarah's swelling was. "I have one, too," Emily whispered. "Had it for 6 months. I got it checked 3 months ago. The doctor said I needed a biopsy." She looked down. "I didn't go back. I was scared, and I told myself it was nothing, and I just didn't go. But seeing you now, seeing what happened," Emily's voice broke. "I should have told you. I should have warned you, but I was too much of a coward." Sarah reached for her sister's hand. "It's not your fault, isn't it?" Emily looked at her with hollow eyes. "You're my big sister. You always took care of me, and when you needed me to speak up, to tell you this isn't normal, I stayed quiet because I was too scared to face my own truth." The three of them sat in the gathering darkness. 3 people holding different pieces of the same terrible puzzle. Margaret arrived 15 minutes later, letting herself in with her spare key. She took one look at the scene, Sarah's monstrous cheek, Emily's tears, David's hollow-eyed desperation, and made a decision. "We're going to Dr. Patterson tomorrow morning, all of us." She pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the coffee table. "I have $500. It's not enough, but it's a start." "Mom, that's your emergency fund. This is an emergency." Margaret's voice was steel. "Your father used to say, your health is your wealth. I watched him die because we waited too long. I won't watch you do the same." Sarah started to protest, But Margaret held up her hand. "When I was 40 years old, I had a small bump on my neck, just like yours. I thought it was nothing, so I tried to pop it myself." She paused, her voice dropping. 3 days later, I was in intensive care with sepsis. The doctors gave me a 20% chance of survival. The Patterson Dermatology Clinic occupied the ground floor of a weathered brick building in southeast Portland, the kind of structure that had survived 40 years through persistence rather than charm. Margaret held the door open for Sarah, whose face was half hidden behind a scarf despite the mild morning temperature. The waiting room was empty, except for an elderly man reading a magazine. Behind the reception desk, a young woman with kind eyes checked them in without staring, though Sarah caught the flicker of shock in her expression. "Dr. Patterson will see you shortly," the receptionist said, her voice carefully neutral. Margaret sat rigid in her chair, her purse clutched in her lap. Sarah hadn't seen her mother this tense since the last days of her father's illness, when every doctor's appointment carried the weight of a potential death sentence. "Mrs. Thompson." They both looked up. The nurse, her name tag read. Jennifer Collins gestured toward the hallway. "Dr. Patterson is ready." The examination room was standard medical beige, smelling of antiseptic and old paper. Sarah climbed onto the table while Margaret stood in the corner, her arms folded across her chest like armor. When Dr. William Patterson entered, Sarah's first thought was that he looked exhausted. He was 62, according to the diploma on the wall, with silver hair and deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. He glanced at Margaret, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, "it's been a long time. 15 years. Margaret replied, her voice flat. Dr. Patterson nodded, then turned his attention to Sarah. "I'm going to examine your cheek. This might be uncomfortable." His hands were steady but cold as he palpated the swelling. Sarah winced. He asked her to open her mouth, checked her lymph nodes, shined a light in her eyes. Every movement was methodical, professional, but she noticed the slight tremor in his fingers when he pulled back. "I need to run some tests," he said. "X-ray, ultrasound, blood work. It'll take about an hour." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. In the waiting room, while Sarah was taken for imaging, Margaret sat alone with her thoughts. The last time she'd been in this office, Robert had been alive. She remembered sitting in this same chair while Dr. Patterson delivered news that had shattered their world. "Mrs. Thompson," she looked up. Dr. Patterson stood in the doorway to his private office, his expression grave. "Could we speak for a moment privately?" In his office, surrounded by medical textbooks and framed certifications, Dr. Patterson sat heavily in his chair. He looked older here, worn down by years of delivering bad news. "I made a mistake with your husband," he said without preamble. 15 years ago, Robert came in with a mole on his back. I looked at it, told him it was probably fine, to watch it for 6 months. By the time he came back, the melanoma had already spread. Margaret's throat tightened. "I know. I should have biopsied it immediately. I should have been more cautious. But I wasn't, and he died because of my negligence." Dr. Patterson's voice was rough. "Every day since then, I've had to live with that failure. I see his face every time I look at a patient. I see your daughters growing up without their father. Why are you telling me this now? Because when you called about Sarah, I almost turned you away. I'm supposed to retire next month. I'd already stopped taking new patients. He looked down at his hands. But then I heard the name Thompson, and I thought, this is my chance. This is the one time I can make it right. Margaret sat silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You can't bring him back. No, but I can save his daughter. The test results came back within the hour. Dr. Patterson called them both into his office, his expression grim. The X-ray sat illuminated on a light box, showing the swollen tissue and something else, something deeper that Sarah couldn't interpret. This isn't a simple cyst, Dr. Patterson said. You have what appears to be a complex infected mass, possibly with involvement of the deeper tissue layers. If you'd waited another 48 hours, you'd likely be facing a life-threatening blood infection. Sarah felt the room tilt. What does that mean? It means you need surgery immediately, tomorrow morning at the latest. How much? The question came from Margaret, sharp and direct. Dr. Patterson pulled out a paper, sliding it across the desk. The numbers swam before Sarah's eyes. $8,500. The surgery alone was $3,500. The hospital required a deposit of $3,500 just to schedule it. The number sat on the table between them like a guillotine blade. $8,500. Sarah stared at it until the digits blurred into meaninglessness. I don't have that, she said, her voice hollow. Margaret opened her purse with shaking hands. I have $2,100 saved. It's all I have left after paying property taxes. Mom, no, your father's life insurance ran out years ago. This is what's left. Margaret's jaw was set, her eyes fierce. You're taking it. David arrived at the clinic 20 minutes later, summoned by Sarah's frantic phone call. He brought a folder of papers, his face gray with exhaustion. My parents can lend us $1,500. It's all they can spare. Dad's medical bills from his heart surgery last year cleaned them out. Emily, who'd driven straight from her night shift, pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. I have $800 in checking. Take it. Sarah looked at the three of them. These people who loved her, who were emptying their lives to save hers. The math was simple and brutal. $2,100 plus $1,500 plus $800, $4,400. They were still $4,100 short of the deposit, let alone the full cost. There has to be another way, Sarah said. A payment plan? Charity care? Something? I already asked, Margaret said quietly. They need the deposit up front. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. The bank rejected my personal loan application. No stable employment. The words hung in the air like a confession. Sarah watched her husband crumble, watched him age 10 years in 10 seconds. He'd been holding himself together with pride and denial, and now both were gone. I'm sorry, he whispered, not looking at her. I'm so sorry. What kind of husband can't even stop? Sarah reached for his hand. This isn't your fault, but whose fault was it? The school district that had cut her insurance, the medical system that demanded money before mercy, the universe that seemed determined to take from her family until nothing remained. Emily stood abruptly. I'm setting up a GoFundMe. No, Sarah's response was immediate. Absolutely not. Why not? Because I won't beg strangers for money. I won't, her voice cracked, I won't be a charity case. It's not begging, Emily said. It's asking for help. There's a difference. Is there? Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, hot and shameful. What am I supposed to say? Hi. I'm too poor to afford basic medical care in the richest country in the world. Please save me. Yes, Emily said simply. Exactly that, because it's true, and because people will help if you let them. I can't. Then you'll die. Emily's voice was brutal in its honesty. Is your pride worth more than your life? The question silenced the room. Sarah looked at her sister, at her mother, at her husband, at Dr. Patterson, standing in the doorway with his decades of guilt weighing on his shoulders. She thought about her father, who'd fought until his body betrayed him. She thought about Margaret at 40, lying in an ICU bed with a 20% chance of survival. She thought about the students in her classroom who needed her, who wouldn't understand why Miss Thompson never came back. Okay, she whispered. Do it. Emily's fingers flew across her phone screen. Within minutes, the campaign was live. Help Sarah Thompson fight for her life. The description was simple and devastating. The photos showed Sarah's face, unfiltered and raw. The goal was set at $10,000 to cover surgery, recovery, and unforeseen costs. Done, Emily said. I've shared it with every teacher and parent from your school, everyone from my hospital, all our friends. The first donation came through within seconds. $50 from Marcus's mother, the boy who'd asked about Sarah's face. The comment read, Ms. Thompson taught my son to read when everyone else had given up on him. Let us help her now. Sarah started crying and couldn't stop. By evening, the donations had reached $1,200 from 47 people. Each notification was a small miracle, a stranger's kindness measured in increments of $20, $50, and $100. But the comments were what broke Sarah's heart. She stayed after school every day to help my daughter with math. She never asked for anything in return. Best teacher our family has ever known. Teachers save our children. Time to save her. David sat beside her on the couch, reading each one aloud because Sarah couldn't see through her tears. Margaret had gone home to rest, promising to return first thing in the morning. Emily was on her phone, relentlessly sharing the campaign with every contact she had. At midnight, Principal Linda Bennett called. Her voice was tight with emotion. Sarah, I need you to know something. The school board met tonight in an emergency session. We're reinstating your full-time contract with immediate benefits. Sarah's breath caught. What? We found the money. Cut from other places. Your insurance will be active in 30 days, but Linda's voice broke. But I know that's too late. I'm so sorry we put you in this position. It's not your fault. Isn't it? Linda said. We made a choice to value budget over people. That's on us, on me. But 30 days was an eternity. Sarah had until tomorrow morning. At 2 a.m, Sarah's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She answered with trembling hands. Ms. Thompson, this is Dr. Patterson. His voice was rough, like he'd been awake for days. I need to tell you something. The hospital fee, the deposit, I'm covering $5,000 of it myself. Sarah arrived at Providence Medical Center at 5 p.m, her small overnight bag packed with items she couldn't remember choosing. Margaret drove while David sat in the back seat beside Sarah. holding her hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Room 412 overlooked the Willamette River, gray and sluggish under the autumn sky. The hospital bed was too firm, the pillow too thin, the gown too exposing. Sarah changed mechanically, her mind elsewhere, floating somewhere above her body where fear couldn't reach. Emily arrived with takeout nobody ate. They sat together in forced normalcy, talking about everything except tomorrow. When visiting hours ended at 9, the goodbyes stretched, long and desperate. David was the last to leave. He kissed Sarah's forehead, her nose, her lips, avoiding the monstrous swelling that had consumed half her face. "I love you," he whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up. Promise, promise." After he left, Emily slipped back in, her nurse's badge granting her access beyond civilian hours. She sat on the edge of Sarah's bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "I have to tell you something," Emily said. "Something I should have told you months ago." Sarah looked at her sister's face and saw her own fear reflected back. "I have one too." Emily's hand went to her left cheek, pressing against skin that looked normal, healthy. Six months ago. I felt a small lump. It hurt. I went to my doctor. She said I needed a biopsy to rule out anything serious. I didn't go back." Emily's voice cracked. "I told myself I was too busy with work, that it was probably nothing, that I'd deal with it later. But the truth is I was terrified, and I'm a coward, and I let you go through this duel alone when I should have warned you." Sarah pulled her sister close, feeling Emily shake with sobs against her shoulder. "You're not a coward. You're scared. There's a difference. Watching you now, seeing what I could become." Emily pulled back, her face wet with tears. "Promise me something. Promise that after you get through this, you'll make me get it checked. Don't let me be stupid anymore." "I promise. And promise you won't die tomorrow." Emily's voice broke completely. "I can't lose you. I can't. I'll try my best." After Emily left, Sarah was alone with the machines and the silence. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that let thoughts creep in uninvited. She looked at her phone. The GoFundMe had reached $3,200 from 109 people. Strangers had saved her life in increments of $20 and $50 and $100. She thought about her father, wondered if he'd felt this same hollowing dread the night before his first surgery. Had he written letters, too? Had he bargained with God in the darkness? Sarah pulled out a notebook and pen from her bag. Her hand shook as she wrote, "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being stubborn. I'm sorry for saying you worried too much. You were right about everything, and I was too proud to listen. You saved my life by refusing to let me ignore this. If I don't make it, please know that's not your fault. You did everything right. You always have. I love you. Tell David I love him. Tell Emily to get her cheek checked. Please? Your daughter, Sarah." She wrote similar letters to David and Emily, sealing each in an envelope she labeled with their names. Then she placed them in her bag where they'd be found. The swelling on her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, a grotesque metronome counting down the hours. Sarah touched it gently and felt the skin stretched drum-tight over something that didn't belong. She imagined the infection spreading through her blood, imagined dying here in this sterile room while the river flowed indifferent outside her window. Her phone glowed with a text from Margaret. "Can't sleep, thinking of you. I love you more than my own life. Sarah typed back, I love you too. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. She stared at the clock. 11:30. The surgery was scheduled for 7 in the morning. 7.5 hours to wait. 7.5 hours to wonder what Dr. Patterson would find when he cut her open. Sarah pulled out her wallet and found the photo she always carried her father on her 8th birthday, laughing as she blew out candles. He'd been so alive then, so present. She tried to remember his voice, the exact timbre and rhythm of it, but 15 years had eroded the memory until only impressions remained. Dad, she whispered to the photo, I'm scared. Were you scared? The photo didn't answer. Her father's frozen smile offered no wisdom, no comfort. He'd been 45 when he died. She was 28 now, young enough that death still seemed like something that happened to other people, except it had happened to her father. It had almost happened to her mother, and tomorrow it might happen to her. Sarah lay back against the too firm pillow and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them to keep her mind occupied. 1, 2, 3, 4. When she reached 100, she started over. Somewhere around the third count, exhaustion dragged her under into fitful sleep. She dreamed of her father in the hospital bed, of Margaret at 40 with sepsis burning through her veins, of the thing growing in her cheek, spreading tendrils through her face like roots through soil. She dreamed of drowning in medical debt, of David counting coins while she bled out on a gurney they couldn't afford. She woke at 3 in the morning, her hospital gown soaked with sweat, her cheek screaming with pain. The nurse brought medication that barely dulled the edge. They came for Sarah at 7:15, 2 orderlies who spoke in gentle voices as they wheeled her bed through fluorescent corridors. Margaret, David, and Emily walked alongside until they reached the surgical wing's double doors. Margaret kissed Sarah's forehead. David squeezed her hand. Emily whispered, "See you soon." Then the doors swung shut, and Sarah was alone with strangers who would cut her open and perhaps not put her back together again. In the waiting room, Margaret knelt on the hard plastic chair, her rosary beads clicking through her fingers. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," she murmured, the words worn smooth by decades of repetition. David sat rigid beside her, staring at the surgical board where Sarah's name glowed in yellow letters, Thompson, S. In surgery. Emily paced, unable to sit still, her nurse's training useless against her own sister's mortality. In the operating room, William Patterson stood scrubbed and gowned, staring down at Sarah's unconscious face. The anesthesia had softened her features, made her look impossibly young. She could have been Robert Thompson's daughter at 13, the age she'd been when Patterson had failed her father. "Doctor!" The surgical nurse held out the scalpel. Patterson's hand trembled as he took it. Behind his mask, he whispered words no one could hear. "I won't fail you, not this time." The first incision released a flood of purulent fluid, yellow-white and foul. The infection had progressed further than the imaging suggested, burrowing deep into the tissue. Patterson worked methodically, his years of experience overriding his fear, cutting away dead tissue, irrigating, searching for the source. "There's something solid here," Nurse Collins said, her gloved fingers probing the cavity. "It's not organic tissue." Patterson leaned closer, his magnifying loops bringing the wound into sharp focus. He reached in with forceps and felt them close around something hard, angular, and foreign. When he pulled it free, the entire surgical team went silent. A triangular shard of glass, 2 centimeters long and wickedly sharp, lay gleaming in the forceps. Dark brown material, dried blood crusted one edge. The glass had been encased in fibrous tissue. The body's desperate attempt to wall off an intruder it couldn't expel. "How long has this been in there?" Collins breathed. Patterson stared at the glass, his mind racing backward through diagnostic possibilities. "Years," he said. "Maybe a decade." In the waiting room, Margaret's rosary beads fell silent. She sat frozen, her eyes fixed on nothing, gripped by a premonition she couldn't name. David stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. His phone buzzed with a notification, another job rejection, his 53rd. He deleted it without reading past the subject line. Emily sat down in the chair. David had vacated, her head in her hands. She thought about the lump in her own cheek, the appointment she'd missed, the fear she'd let metastase into denial. The surgery stretched to 2 hours, then 3. Patterson removed every trace of infected tissue, flushed the wound repeatedly, sent samples to pathology with a silent prayer that they'd come back benign. When he finally closed the incision, his hands were steady, but his scrubs were soaked with sweat. He found the family in the waiting room, 3 people who looked like they'd aged a decade in 3 hours. "The surgery went well," he said, and watched them collapse with relief. "But I need to show you something." In the consultation room, he set a sealed specimen container on the table. The glass shard gleamed inside, innocuous and deadly. This was embedded deep in Sarah's facial tissue. It's glass, likely from a mirror or window. Based on the body's tissue response, I'd estimate it's been there approximately 10 years. Margaret leaned forward, squinting at the container. Glass how? Most likely from a trauma she doesn't remember, or one that seemed minor at the time. A small cut, perhaps. The glass was too small for an X-ray to detect, and it migrated deeper over time. Eventually, her body formed a cyst around it. Recently, that cyst became infected. David's voice was hoarse. If we'd waited 48 hours more and the infection would have spread to her bloodstream. After that, Patterson didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Can we see her?" Margaret asked. "She's in recovery. Another hour, then yes." But there was still the matter of the pathology results. 3 days of waiting to know if the tissue they'd removed contained cancer cells. If this nightmare had only just begun, those 3 days were their own kind of surgery. A slow excision of hope. Sarah lay in her hospital bed while Margaret slept in the chair beside her. David brought food no one ate. Emily worked her shifts at the hospital and visited during every break, her own lump a constant weight in her thoughts. The GoFundMe climbed to $7,400. Strangers continued their small acts of mercy. On the 3rd day, Dr. Patterson called. "I need to see you, all of you. Can you come to my office at 4? The dread in Sarah's stomach turned to ice. They gathered in Patterson's office at 4, the same room where Margaret had learned her husband was dying 15 years ago. Patterson sat across from them, a manila folder on his desk. The silence stretched. Margaret's hand found Sarah's. David's hand found Margaret's. Emily stood behind them, her hands on Sarah's shoulders. Patterson opened the folder. His face was grave, unreadable. 5 seconds of silence. 10. Then he smiled. It's benign. No cancer cells. No abnormal tissue. You're clear. Margaret sobbed. David's head dropped to the desk. Emily's knees buckled. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only stare at this man who'd saved her life. There's something else I need to tell you, Patterson said. He pulled an envelope from his drawer and slid it across the desk to Margaret. This is for you. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten letter. Dear Margaret, 15 years ago, I failed your husband. I saw a warning sign and dismissed it. By the time we caught his melanoma, it was too late. Robert Thompson died because I was careless. Every day since then, I've carried that failure. I've seen his face in every patient. I've second-guessed every diagnosis, terrified of making the same mistake twice. When you called about Sarah, I knew this was my chance, not to undo what I did that's impossible, but to save Robert's daughter, to finally do right by your family. The enclosed check covers my portion of Sarah's surgery. Please accept it not as charity, but as payment of a debt 15 years overdue. I'm sorry I couldn't save your husband. I'm grateful I could save your daughter, William Patterson. Margaret read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up at Patterson, her voice was barely a whisper. You don't owe us anything. I owe Robert Thompson an apology I can never deliver. This is the closest I can come. 3 months later, on Thanksgiving morning, Margaret woke before dawn and began preparing the meal her husband had loved. The turkey went into the oven at 6. The cranberry sauce simmered on the stove while she peeled potatoes at the kitchen sink. Her hands moving through rituals perfected over decades. Sarah had been home from the hospital for 11 weeks. The scar on her cheek was still pink and raised, a curved line that would fade with time but never disappear. She touched it sometimes without thinking, a reminder of how close she'd come to vanishing from the world. She'd returned to teaching 4 weeks after surgery. The children had made a banner that read, "Welcome back, Ms. Thompson," in crayon letters 3 feet tall. Marcus had presented her with a drawing of her face, the scar rendered in careful red marker, with the words, "You're still beautiful," printed underneath in his mother's handwriting. David had found work at a small tech startup, taking a pay cut but gaining insurance that covered his family. Every Friday, he still brought Sarah roses, a tradition he'd maintained even when $20 was half of everything they had. Emily had gone to her doctor the day after Sarah's surgery. The biopsy came back benign, a simple cyst that was removed in a 15-minute procedure. She kept the pathology report in her wallet like a talisman, proof that fear could be overcome. At noon, they began arriving at Margaret's house. David carried wine and a pie Sarah had insisted on baking despite Margaret's protests. Emily came with her boyfriend Jake, a quiet paramedic she'd met during a late-night emergency call. They were still new together, their hands finding each other shyly as they walked through the door. The dining table was set for 6. 5 chairs held place settings. The 6th chair, Robert's chair, held a framed photograph and a single white candle. At 12:30, the doorbell rang. Der William Patterson stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and looking profoundly uncomfortable. Margaret had called him 2 weeks earlier with an invitation that was really a command. He'd tried to refuse, citing the professional boundary between doctor and patient, but Margaret had been insistent. "You're part of this family now," she'd said, "whether you like it or not." Now he stood in her living room, this man who'd carried her husband's death for 15 years, and Margaret embraced him. "Thank you for coming." They sat down at 1 o'clock, the meal spread across the table in abundance. Margaret carved the turkey while David poured wine. Emily passed dishes. Jake helped serve, eager to be useful, to belong. Patterson sat between Sarah and the empty chair, his eyes drawn repeatedly to Robert's photograph. The man in the picture was 45, healthy, smiling. He'd had 2 more years to live when that photo was taken, though no one had known it yet. Before they ate, Margaret raised her glass. "It's our tradition to say what we're grateful for. I'll start." She paused, composing herself. "I'm grateful we're all here. 15 years ago, I lost my husband. 27 years ago, I almost died. 3 months ago, I almost lost my daughter. But we're still here. We survived." Sarah went next, her hand unconsciously touching her scar. "I'm grateful for Mom, who refused to let me ignore what was happening, who saved my life by being stubborn and relentless and right about everything." She smiled through. "I'm sorry I said you worried too much." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. David cleared his throat, his voice rough. "I'm grateful for Sarah, who didn't leave me when I lost my job, who let me fail and loved me anyway. I'm grateful for second chances." Emily's turn came, and she looked at Sarah. "I'm grateful my sister taught me the most important lesson. Don't hide, don't wait, don't let fear make you small. She showed me courage looks like admitting you're terrified and getting help anyway." They all turned to Patterson. He sat silent, the wineglass trembling slightly in his hand. When he spoke, his voice barely carried across the table. "I am grateful for forgiveness I don't deserve. I couldn't save Robert." He looked at Margaret, then at Rouse. "But I could save his daughter. And maybe—" His voice broke. "Maybe that means something. Maybe he'd forgive me. If he could." Margaret stood and walked around the table. She stood beside Patterson's chair and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Robert forgave you the day he died. He told me not to blame you. Said you were a good doctor who made a human mistake." Tears streamed down her face. "It's taken me 15 years to understand what he meant. But I understand now. You're forgiven, William. You always were." Patterson covered her hand with his own and wept. They ate then, the meal accompanied by stories and laughter and the comfortable silences of people who'd walked through fire together. Jake told paramedic stories that made Emily blush and everyone else laugh. David described his new job, the startup's chaotic energy, his cautious optimism. Sarah talked about her students, about teaching fractions through pie slices, about how children see scars as proof of survival rather than disfigurement. After dinner, Sarah stood and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned carrying a small wooden box. Inside, mounted on black velvet, was the glass shard that had lived in her face for a decade. Patterson had given it to her after surgery, and she'd had it professionally mounted, a curator's display of her own pain. She handed the box to Patterson. "I want you to have this." He stared at it, confused. "I don't understand." "Keep it on your desk. Let it remind you that you saved me, that you didn't fail this time." Sarah's voice was steady. You've carried my father's death for 15 years. It's time to carry something else. Carry this. Carry proof that you can heal, that you can save, that you're exactly the doctor you need to be. Patterson took the box with shaking hands. The glass caught the candlelight, throwing small rainbows across his palm. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep it. I'll keep it forever. As evening darkened the windows, they moved to the living room. Emily and Jake left first, Emily hugging everyone goodbye with fierce gratitude. David and Sarah stayed to help clean, but Margaret shooed them away, insisting she wanted the quiet time alone with her kitchen. Patterson was the last to leave. He stood at the door, the wooden box tucked under his arm, and looked back at the house. Through the window, he could see Margaret blowing out the candle beside Robert's photograph, her lips moving in prayer or remembrance. "She's extraordinary," he said to Sarah, who'd walked him out. "She's my mom. She's always been extraordinary. I just forgot for a while." Patterson nodded. "Take care of that scar. Keep it moisturized. It'll fade. But slowly." "I don't mind it," Sarah said, touching her cheek. "It reminds me I survived, that we all did." She watched him drive away, then went back inside where David was drying dishes and Margaret was humming an old hymn. The house smelled of turkey and pecan candle wax, smells that meant home, that meant family, that meant they'd made it through another year of loss and joy and stubborn survival. Margaret hung up her dish towel and looked at her daughter, scarred, alive, radiant. "Stay for coffee." "Always," Sarah said. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, drinking coffee and talking about nothing important. Outside, Portland rain began to fall, soft and steady, washing the streets clean. Sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest truths. Sarah thought she had just a pimple, but beneath her skin lay a decade-old secret that nearly killed her. What saved her wasn't money or luck. It was Margaret's stubborn love, the kind that refuses to be dismissed or ignored. It was David's quiet devotion through unemployment and fear. It was Emily's courage to finally face her own denial. It was strangers who gave $20 because a teacher had once stayed late to help their child read. It was Dr. Patterson who carried 15 years of guilt and transformed it into redemption. This story isn't really about a piece of glass. It's about the truth we carry beneath our surfaces, the pain we hide because we're too proud or too scared to ask for help. It's about mothers who know, who see what we refuse to see, who save us with their relentless worry. It's about communities that gather around the broken and say, "We've got you." It's about forgiveness that heals the forgiver as much as the forgiven. We all have something buried beneath our skin, some fear we pretend isn't there. The question is, do we have people who love us enough to refuse our denial? Are we brave enough to be that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments. When did someone's stubborn love save you? Or when did you refuse to let someone you loved stay silent about their pain?